He stood down on the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality, or he would have been dead by now. But then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. You mean die from the operation? Hannah asked. Yes, Sadao said. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said, and first he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here he was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. She turned to the nursery and called, Yumi. But the children heard her voice and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Okay. Now Sadao is of the opinion that whatever it may be, okay, he should have the operation. And Hannah was recalling that it was the first time she's seeing an American after she went left America, and she's calling Yumi from the nursery, okay? And the babies heard her voice and they cried for her. I will put the baby to bed, Yumi replied. He's ready. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. The old gardener, who was also house servant, pulled a few hairs on his upper lip. The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man, he said bluntly to Hannah. The white man ought to die. First he was shot. Then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. I will tell him what you say, Hannah replied courteously, but she herself was also frightened, although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Now, what happened is that Yumi is coming and arranging the bed for this man, and Hannah is going to the kitchen. And actually, Sadao had informed the servants about this prisoner, American prisoner of war. And the old gardener, actually, this man was with Sadao's father, and he was moreover like a family member. And he said that actually the white man was wounded, shot dead, and the sea waves also attacked him. And it's not fair to save such a man, and the sea will take revenge on us if we do so. Now, Hannah says that she will let Sadao know about all these things. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. She went ahead and slid back the partition. Sadawa was not yet there. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. I have never washed a white man, she said, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. Hannah cried at her severely. You will do what your master commands you. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. After all, if the servants would report something that was not as it happened. Very well, she said with dignity. You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses, so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. I will have nothing to do with it, Yumi said. I am a poor person and it's not my business. Then please, Hannah said gently, return to your own work. At once Yumi left the room. But this left Hannah with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. Now, actually, what happened is that Yumi was coming to the room in which the American prisoner of war was laid down, and she is refusing to wash this man. And Hana is becoming angry at her, and Yumi is not at all bothered whether Hana is angry and all. She says that she will not do it, and Hana is requesting her to go back to the babies nearby. Stupid Yumi, she muttered fiercely. Is this anything but a man, and a wounded, helpless man? In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean cloth towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture and must have been very blunt when he was a child. Now, Hannah was left alone with the white man and she was forced to do the cleaning all by herself. Now she is doing the cleaning of the man. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. But she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadavo? Now her anger was ebbing, and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, Sly put the quilt over him. Sadavo, she called softly. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door, and now he opened it. She saw that she had brought his surgeon's emergency bag, and that he wore his surgeon's coat. You have decided to operate, she cried. Now, what happened is that she is washing his upper body and it was made clean, and now she is calling Sadavo to come and do the operation quickly. Yes, he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the Tokonoma Enclave. See, actually, Tokonoma is a name for a Japanese home. It's a thing that's there in Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement. Okay, a piece of art we may call it, and put his instruments out upon it. Fetch towels, he said. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There out also to be old pieces of matting, so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights, and took an armful of them. But when she went back into the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sadhav replied, as though he did not care. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Actually, now what happened is that Sadhava was wearing his surgeon's coat and he was having the surgeon's kit and everything that he was supposed to have for the operation. And now he is sterilizing his instruments, and Hannah was really worried about the 12th, the bed getting dirt, the mat getting dirt and all. And it was actually soaked with blood by the time. And Sadavo is not at all mindful of the bed getting dirt and all. He is commanding her to help him to turn him so that he may get the backside. He can clean the backside where the wound actually happened. Yumi would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Shadavo asked, not stopping for a moment, his swift, concise movements. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to his absorption when he was at work. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long as it was for the work he did so excellently. And actually, Hana is letting him know that Yumi refused to wash him. And Sadava inquired, so you washed him? And Hana was saying, so actually, he was not listening to Hana was saying, and he was so immersed in his work. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it, he said. I, she repeated blankly. But never have I. It is easy enough, he said impatiently. He was talking about the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered in the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. But the bleeding is not superficial. He has lost much blood. Now, Sadao is of the opinion that the wound caused by a bullet shot will be easier to move. But what happened is that here the wound had got deepened and worsened by the wound caused by the rocks. Okay. And he's asking Hannah to help him give the anesthesia as well. At this moment Hannah choked. He looked up and saw her face, the color of sulphur. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching, but he went on with his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation, but her distress and his ability to go her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. And what happened is that he is removing that covering that he had kept on the wound. And but by that time Hannah was felt feeling like vomiting and all. And he said, don't faint, and she's running out of the room and she's vomiting there. And Sadhava was really feeling bad for Hannah because Hannah had never seen an operation, and actually Sadhava wanted to go and help Hannah, but actually he was unable to go. He's stopping the surgery in between, then that American man would certainly die. So he was feeling so impatient and irritable at that situation. This man, he thought, there is no reason under heaven why he should live. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless and he proceeded swiftly. In his dream, the man mourned, but Sadavo paid no heed except to mutter at him. Groan, he muttered. Groan if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing it. The door opened and there was Hannah again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. Sadhava motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back, he said. This fellow is beginning to stir. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? She asked. Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near his nostrils. Sadhava replied without delaying for one moment. The intricate detail of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. So now what happens is that Sadhava was feeling so helpless, okay? He was not able to conclude what he wanted. And when he began his surgery, he, his man, American prisoner of war, he began to groan in pain. And Sadavo was so angry at him. He felt that it was so cruel of him that he let Hannah choke like this. And he said to the American prisoner that if you are crying in pain, then cry. I am not doing this for my happiness. Then at that moment, Hannah is opening the door and she's coming in, and she is now willful of giving the anesthetic. She is asking the instructions on how to give it. She crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously thin face, she thought, and the lips were twisted. The man was suffering, whether he knew it or not. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. They came like flickers of rumor, told by word of mouth and always contradicted. In the newspapers, the reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly, with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? So, as instructed by Sadao, Hannah was ready to give the anesthesia, and she is soaking the cotton in the medicine, and she was approaching the American to make him breathe it. And she was so much moved with pity on this man's face, and she recalled the sufferings of the prisoners in Japanese armies, and he recalled a man by the name General Takima, who was a very cruel fellow who used to beat his wife and all. And she recalled that if a man can be so cruel to his wife, then he can be cruel to a prisoner as well. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck just under the ear. Those scars, she muttered, lifting her eyes to Sadao. But he did not answer. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously near the kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. He probed with his fingers, delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge. Ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's cardinal sin, sirs. He had thundered at his classes year after year to operate without a complete knowledge of the body. If you had made it anything less than that is murder. Now Sadavo was very much concentrated in the operation that he was not listening to the Hana. Actually, Hana was making him note the scars on the neck of that man. And he recalls the words of his American professor that ignorance of the human body is a surgeon's serious sin. Okay, and he felt something touching the instrument, and that was the kidney. And now he thought of concentrating in the surgery more. It's not quite at the kidney, my friend, Sadavo murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. So here Sadao is saying to him that the bullet hadn't struck the kidney, and it was his typical habit to talk to the patient when he was doing the operation. My friend, he always called his patients, and so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions, the bullet was out. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, he muttered a few English words. Guts, he muttered, choking. They got my guts. Sadao, Hannah cried sharply. Shh, Sadao said. The man sank again into silence, so profound that Sadao took up his wrist, hating the touch of it. Yes, there was still a pulse so faint, so feeble, but enough. If he wanted the man to live, to give hope. But certainly I do not want this man to live, he thought. No more anesthetic, he told Hannah. He turned as swiftly as though he had never paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial and from it filled a hypodermic and thrust it into the patient's left arm. Then, putting down the needle, he took the man's wrist again. The pulse under his fingers fluttered once or twice and then grew stronger. This man will live in spite of all, he said to Hannah and sighed. The young man woke, so weak, his blue eyes so terrified, when he perceived. Now, what happens is that he is taking out the bullet very carefully, and then he is feeling the pulse, and he found that the pulse was going low, and he is giving an injection to keep the pulse. Here he was that Hannah felt compelled to apologize. She herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. When she came in the first time, she saw him summon his small strength to be prepared for some fearful thing. Don't be afraid, she begged him softly. How come you speak English? He gasped. I was a long time in America. She replied. She saw that he wanted to reply to that, but he could not, and so she knelt and fed him gently from the porcelain spoon. He ate unwillingly, but still he ate. Now, will you soon be strong? She said, not liking him and yet moved to comfort him. He did not answer. Now, from the next day onwards, Hannah was bringing food for him, and he inquired how Hannah knew English, and she talks about all her studies in America, and she was trying her best to feel him comfortable. When Sadao came in the third day after the operation, found the young man sitting up, his face bloodless. Lie down, Sadao cried. Do you want to die? He forced the man down gently and strongly and examined the wound. You may kill yourself if you do this sort of thing, he scolded. What are you going to do with me? The boy muttered. He looked just now barely 17. Are you going to hand me over? For a moment, Sadao did not answer. He finished his examination and then pulled the silk quilt over the man. I do not know myself what I shall do with you, he said. I ought, of course, to give you to the police. You are a prisoner of war. No, do not tell me anything. He put up his hand as he saw the young man was about to speak. Do not even tell me your name unless I ask it. Then looked at each other for a moment, and then the young man closed his eyes and turned his face to the wall. Okay, he whispered, his mouth a bit aligned. Outside the door, Hannah was waiting for Sadao. He saw at once that she was in trouble. Sadao, Yumi tells me the servants feel they cannot stay if we hide this man here any more, she said. She tells me that they are saying that to you, and I were so long in America that we have forgotten to think of our own country first. They think we like Americans. Now, Sadabo was coming to meet this American prisoner, and when he came, this prisoner was sitting, and Sadavo got so angry at that and he asked him to lie down and take rest. And the American prisoner was asking him whether he will hand him over to the police. And he said not to utter a word, don't to say anything unless I ask you. And he obeyed him and he is lying down. And at this point, Hana is informing Sadavo that Yumi had told that their servants are planning to leave the house if they are not sending this American off from the house. Because the servants are thinking that as Hana and Sadao were long time in America, they do like Americans. At this point, Sadao became so angry. It is not true, Sadao said harshly. Americans are our enemies, but I have been trained not to let a man die if I can help it. The servants cannot understand that, she said anxiously. No, he agreed. Neither seemed able to say more, and somehow the household dragged on. The servants grew more watchful. Their courtesy was as careful as ever, but their eyes were cold upon the pair to whom they were hired. It's clear what our master ought to do, the old gardener said one morning. He had worked with flowers all his life, and had been a specialist too in moss. For Sadao's father, he had made one of the finest moss gardens in Japan, sweeping the bright green carpet constantly so that not a leaf or a pine needle marred the velvet of its surface. My old master's son knows very well what he ought to do, he now said, pinching a bud from a bush as he spoke. When the man was so near death, why did he not let him bleed? That young master is so proud of his skill to save life that he saves any life, the cook said contemptuously. She split a fowl's neck skillfully and held fluttering the bird, and let its blood flow into the roots of a wisteria vine. Blood is the best of fertilizers, and the old gardener would not let her waste a drop of it. Now we can see a very good discussion of the servants because Sadawa was feeling so angry at Yumi's remark that as Hana and Sadawa had a good time at America, they like Americans. Sadawa says in a very harsh language that he hates Americans. And now at the servant's cottage there was a strong discussion. The old gardener said that Sadawa's father was a very good specialist of the moss and he knew all the medicinal qualities. And the cook said that Sadava was so proud of his skills of saving life that he is saving the life of this American. It is the children of whom we must think, Yumi said sadly. What will be their fate if their father is condemned as a traitor? They did not try to hide what they said from the ears of Hannah, as she stood arranging the day's flowers in the veranda nearby, and she knew they spoke on purpose that she might hear. And that they were right she knew too in most of her being, but there was another part of her which she herself could not understand. It was not sentimental liking of the prisoner. She had come to think of him as a prisoner. She had not liked him even yesterday when he had said in his impulsive way, "Anyway, let them tell you that my name is Tom." She had only bowed her little distant bow. She saw hurt in his eyes, but she did not wish to assuage it. Indeed, he was a great trouble in this house. Actually, the servants were saying all these things. Yumi remarked that she was worried about the children. What will be their fate if the parents, Sadawa and Hannah, will be blamed as traitors? Actually, they were saying all these things for Hannah to hear, as Hannah was standing at a very small distance from them. And Hannah also knew that servants were right, but she was helpless. She was not able to turn her head away from that American prisoner of war. Yesterday he said his name to her, that his name is Tom. And she was not able to comfort him, and she saw a very great trouble and pain in his eyes as well.